Welcome back to the Foyer. I'm your host, Patrick Mason, and I'm coming to you from Utah State University in the Religious Studies program here, and we are thrilled to be back with another episode. I'm especially excited that we've got a live audience again, and so they'll be able to write in some questions at the end of the episode using the Q&A feature of Zoom. So we look forward to hearing from you, those of you who are tuned in tonight. Thanks for doing that. A couple of show notes before we begin. If you enjoy what you hear here on the Foyer, then please take a moment to rate and review the podcast on whatever platform it is that you listen to it on. That helps us to get more people to know about the show and to listen in on the conversation. Second, I want to make you aware of our next episode, which we will record on Tuesday, November 16th at 7 o'clock Mountain, when authors Blair Ostler and Taylor Petrie will join me to talk about queer Mormon history and theology. So join us for that one. It'll, like all of our episodes, be available for a later download as well as a podcast. And finally, as always, I want to thank the staff in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences here at Utah State University, especially Simon Bergholtz and Ricky Linton, who do all kinds of mysterious and magical things behind the scenes to make this actually work. So thank you to all those who make this happen. All right, so let's dive into today's episode, which is called Latter-day Saints and Politics, Toward a More Civil and Perfect Union. It's no secret to say that America's society and politics right now are deeply divided. Our political culture is as fractured and dysfunctional as at any time, arguably, since the American Civil War. Latter-day Saints have not been immune to this polarization, but there have also been voices calling for a return to a politics of civility and the elevation of the better angels of our nature in the ongoing quest for a more perfect union. And so I am pleased tonight, honored, to be joined by two of the people who have been raising their voices in favor of a distinctively Latter-day Saint way of engaging politics and the public square more constructively than we've done in recent years. So first, let me welcome my friend, Tom Griffith. Thomas B. Griffith was appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit by President George W. Bush in 2005. He stepped down from that court in 2020 and is now special counsel in the Washington, D.C. office of the international law firm of Hunton Andrews Kurth. He's also a lecturer at Harvard Law School and a fellow at the Wheatley Institution at BYU, which will be launching a new project on supporting and defending the Constitution. Tom's previous experience includes stints as general counsel at BYU and as the nonpartisan chief legal officer of the U.S. Senate. This spring, President Biden appointed Tom as a member of the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court, so you know where to send your recommendations. Tom did his undergraduate work at BYU and earned his law degree from the University of Virginia. Tom, welcome to the Foyer.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
You bet. Next, I'm pleased to be joined by Jennifer Walker Thomas, who is co-executive director for Mormon Women for Ethical Government, an organization that I deeply admire. And that's a new appointment, so congratulations, Jen. Jen received her bachelor's degree in art history and Italian from Brigham Young University and went on to do graduate work in art history at NYU's Institute of Fine Arts. She worked as a consultant for underperforming schools in the New York City public school system, and then worked in event planning and major gift fundraising for Massachusetts General Hospital. Following the birth of her 4 boys, Jennifer became a full-time parent and has consistently volunteered in her community. She currently serves as an elected member of the town government in Belmont, Massachusetts, where she lives with her husband and sons. Jen, it is great to have you here.
Thank you.
All right, so I want to start with a question for both of you. Both of you have been observers of and participants in American civic life for a while. How would you, I talked about the division of this. This is not a revelation to anybody that we live in a divided society. How would you assess our current moment and put it in context of what you've seen or experienced or studied about the past? I mean, how did we get to where we are here in 2021 and what really concerns you about where we are right now. Jen, do you want to start?
Wow, that is a sweeping question.
Yeah, we'll start with the small stuff.
um, I think honestly, what we're finding out, and I think that we all need to be very aware of the fact that we're finding out that we got sort of where we are, not by accident, but because to some degree we've been led there. I think there have been significant actors at work whose interests have been to make our politics more rancorous and divisive. And part of that, I think, is something that is just, changes in society. Every time technology comes, there's the potential for good and there's the potential for bad. And I think we're finding out that social media, not just the internet, but social media in particular, has had a pretty destructive effect, most specifically on democracy and the ability of individuals to kind of be informed actors in their civic sphere. So I guess the reason I bring that up first is because I think one of the things that has come out of the last few years has been a very decided desire on the part of all of us to freely judge the people that disagree with us and to want to hold them to account for the bad part that we think that they have played. But I think it's really important for us, if we want to start any conversations about what we want things to look like going forward, from a position of compassion and from a place of a desire to really build bridges. So that isn't to say we shouldn't hold people accountable for things that they've done, but I think we also have to be aware that so many of us have been sort of at sea on a boat that we didn't really understand. And as it becomes clear to us, we need to figure out how we're going to act as citizens going forward and sort of rebuild some of our institutions and relationships.
Yeah, that's great. Tom, what do you think? Where are we and how did we get here?
Well, how we got here, I think, is really complicated. I think Jen's identified a lot of the factors. I mean, there's a whole body of literature out there that's asking that same question: how did we get here? And there are lots of different suspects for how we got there. Well, how we got here, I can just tell you that I'm the oldest one on this call, and it's the worst I've seen. And I'm not a scholar, I'm not a pundit, but I am an observer, and I'm a kind of a political junkie. I mean, I've watched this stuff my whole. I'm a native Washingtonian. I grew up with this stuff. I listened to C-SPAN radio. I mean, that's how bad I. And so. And I can just tell you, maybe it's the old man in me getting cranky and turn down the music and get off my yard. But seriously, it's the worst I have seen in my life.
I mean, including I don't want to. We won't say what your birth year is, but including the '60s, including. I mean, you were Senate legal counsel during the Clinton impeachment.
Yeah. During Camelot days. I mean, that just looks like it was, as I jokingly say, there was a time when that was a pretty unique thing. Not anymore. Everyone's been involved in impeachment now, and no, it's the worst that I've seen in my lifetime. And then people who are more knowledgeable than I am say it's the most divisive we've been since 1860, and so. Lots of factors that go into it, but I think I don't like Chicken Little approaches. Most of my life, I've grown up with politicians claiming that the next election was the most important election in the history of the country, and but I really feel that something really significant and bad has happened in the last little while, and we face. Really a moment of reckoning right now. I used to tell my law clerks when we had lunchtime discussions, and I hired them without regard to their political affiliation. So we'd have these spirited discussions in our chambers, and I would always tell the folks who lost the last election, I would say, hang in there, the Republic's going to survive, and that was sort of my mantra. And I think it will survive. I think, but I don't know. I'm much less confident of that today because of the forces that have been let loose on the land. So I'm very deeply concerned about the present state of the republic.
Yeah, well, on that happy note, I mean, the reason I have both of you here today is to talk about these serious issues, and one of the things that I like about both of you and what you represent is you're not content just to sit back and do the angry man, wagging your finger type thing and just criticizing, but actually both of you are working actively to try to make things better. To try and promote civic virtues, to promote democratic virtues, to strengthen the American Republic. I mean, you both believe in American democracy, democratic institutions. I mean, why? What is worth saving? What gives you hope? Other than, of course, avoiding civil war and anarchy, right? Which none of us want. But where are there any glimpses? What do you see that you hold on to as something worth saving, holding on to, and promoting? Tom, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm a believer in American exceptionalism, in the sense that the American experiment has stumbled upon something unique in the history of humankind and good. And that is that if you dedicate a society to liberty and equality, that good things will happen, that human flourishing will occur, that bad things can be put behind you, that you can change, that it can be redemptive. So I believe very much in the ideals that form the American nation. I think I'm aware of the shortcomings. It's a long, hard road, and we're not there yet. But we've gone a long way. We've gone a long way, and we've been able to over time experience human flourishing in wonderful ways. We have a long way yet to go. But I believe in that. I think we have stumbled upon a successful formula for a society to create human flourishing, and it's based on these two ideas of liberty and equality. Now, we will have debates over what those mean, right? But as I understand it, that's the project. The project is we want to figure out how to give the maximum amount of liberty and the maximum equality of opportunity. And so I believe that. I'm not willing to give up on that. Although I do have serious concerns about whether we're going to realize those dreams. So no, I'm all in with the American experiment. I believe the Declaration of Independence spoke truth about human nature and human reality. I believe the Constitution of the United States is a brilliant structure of governance to work at those twin values of liberty and equality. So yeah, I'm unabashedly an American exceptionalist, and so that's why I stick with it, and that's why I remain hopeful, but deeply concerned.
Let me ask you and follow up before Jen answers. I mean, so the French Revolution was based on fraternity, liberty, and equality, similar kinds of values. I mean, you talked about American exceptionalism. To what degree is it a project and a vision that is necessarily confined to the United States, or do you think this is a global human endeavor, human project that maybe originated in the United States historically, but actually has that there is a global truly human vision to it?
Yeah, no, I believe that very much. And so when I talk about American exceptionalism, I mean, I think we've been very successful at it. Not successful enough. I'm not satisfied, but I'm in many ways I'm very proud of the progress that we've made. We're trying to do something here that no one has ever tried to do before, right? And that is to create on a continental scale a multicultural society that embraces diversity and praises diversity and encourages it. You're the historian. Correct me. No one's ever tried that before. And we're trying it now. We're finding out it's really hard work.
Especially in the form of a democratic republic, right? It's very different than an empire. That a lot of empires were multi-ethnic, but it's very different in a republican government.
Yeah. So we're trying that now, and I think it's worthwhile. Is it scalable? I do believe it is. I mean, I think the American experience is based on a notion of the nature of the individual and the person and their relationship to government that touches upon universal themes. I'm not advocating that every form of government needs to mimic ours, but I think we've stumbled upon some pretty significant insights as to how to create human flourishing that have been beneficial to many in the world, and I think can be beneficial even more if we improve on it.
Thanks, Jen. What do you think? What do you hold on to? What do you believe in?
So I actually concur. I have deep affection and belief in the system that we've set up, and most specifically the ideals and values upon which that system is founded. I am a historian's daughter, and to kind of, I guess, frame this, if you want people or children to understand or feel a part of something, you need to tell them narratives about their past. And there are three kinds of narratives you can tell. You can either tell an ascending narrative, which is sort of the traditional rags to riches, hardship to glory. It's the one we're super fond of, I think, both as Americans and as Latter-day Saints. And you can tell a descending narrative that is a bummer. It's like, my people were awesome, but then we thought we were awesome, but actually we really stunk. And, it all landed in a pile of garbage. And I think that is a little bit the narrative that we see on display right now nationally. There are a lot of people that are very aware of how of the significant disparity between our values and the things that we espouse and the way we as a people, as a nation, really actually lived up to them expansively, right? We did for some people, but not for all people. We actually did a fair amount of harm on the way to doing a fair amount of good. And that narrative is a descending narrative that just sort of lands us in the bottom of the pile. And it turns out that there's a third kind of narrative that we can tell, and that's an oscillating narrative, which tells the story of people as rising and falling, but essentially a true, really good oscillating narrative shows people moving ahead and upward, even though it's not necessarily linear, right? And it turns out if you do studies of really what engages people and what makes them feel hopeful and what makes them feel empowered, it's if they are grounded in the understanding of themselves and their people and the culture from which they come as an oscillating narrative. The ascending narrative either means you fit or you don't. You're part of the people that climbed or you don't count. The descending narrative is a giant bummer and nobody really wants to engage with it. But the oscillating narrative is one that is willing to acknowledge what has gone wrong, see the difficulties, but also be very pragmatic and proactive about describing what was good and not letting that get lost. And I think that for me, and I think specifically for MWEG, what we are trying to engage in is a very honest look at who we are, where we've been, but also empowering all of us to be participants in that oscillating upward swing, right? Each of us we belong to a group of people that haven't always won and haven't always done the right thing. But at every pivotal point, we went up because there were people that cared enough to do the right thing or to enunciate more clearly the values And so to me, I think, while I agree that there's no question, I'm really not trying to be a Pollyanna. I despair many days. But while I think that we find ourselves in a bit of a dip, I have to believe and have hope that if those values are really everything that we claim them to be, we can rally a new generation behind them. We can articulate to this new generation why they should matter to them. And we can do the honest, hard work of explaining to them that we see why they think we have failed, and that we are willing to empower them to make things better. Right. So I am hopeful that if those of us that truly believe in the American experiment and really believe in these values, if we are willing to stick with it, and acknowledge maybe the ways openly in which it's failed, then we actually could engage in a period of significant redemption where we are willing to see who we are and we're willing to move ahead. Now, I am the first to argue that that is not the general voice that's out there. But I think it's also really important for us to remember historically that every single time we've swung up, it was never sure that we were going to do that. A lot hung in the balance. Every single time we dipped, it wasn't ever certain that we were going to get up and out. And it really was because of the efforts of often a small but very determined group of people who were resilient and patriotic, and in most cases trying to be good, that sort of got us there. So I personally am determined to try to be one of those people and to try to create gathering spaces for those people, so that we can amplify our voices by unifying them.
Do you think, I really like that image of the kind of oscillating notion. But do you think that, especially in an age of social media, I mean, like you talked about it, you diagnose the problems that have come about because of that, the echo chambers, the kind of simplistic thinking, the othering that happens. Everybody is, all that matters is beating your enemy, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, are Americans capable right now of embracing complex narratives about themselves, let alone others?
Some are, some aren't, right? But I certainly think that the ones that aren't going to get closer to embracing those complex narratives, if they're just presented a descending narrative, right? I think we have to be willing to have simultaneously honest and hard conversations, but with a hopeful voice.
Hey,
And I
Patrick,
think,
if I can,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, jump in.
no, go ahead, Jen, finish. I'm sorry, finish. Yeah. Now, I was going to follow up on what Jen had to say. One of the formative experiences in my life has been that for about a 10 or 15-year period, I was able to spend a lot of energy working with really good people, helping build rule of law projects in the former communist countries of Central and Eastern Europe. And that was an inspiring experience for me. They have a lot of work to do. This democracy thing is tough to do. But what inspired me most was that it was the ideas of the American Constitution and the American founding that was inspiring these people. And so that let me know that they're not just cultural. I think they're universal. So that was an important reason for my hope and my optimism, is to see that the power of those ideas can be transformative. Now, they're very fragile ideas, right? I mean, the rule of law is a fragile possibility, as we've seen in our own country, so it's hard work. I can't remember, was it President Clinton or President Obama who said, "There's nothing that's wrong about America that can't be fixed by that which is right about America." And I think that summarizes maybe what Jen, the oscillating model that you had. And I think it's important that we teach that, and that's a positive, but it's also recognizing we have difficulty. Now, I haven't answered your really tough question, and that is it capable? Is American people capable of doing that now? I don't know the answer to that, but I don't know the alternative. I don't know any alternative except to try and teach the value of these principles that have had such success in the lives of so many people over so much period of time, that even though they may seem to be in jeopardy and in peril right now, that makes it all the more important to double down and work hard at teaching them.
Can I just share a small anecdote? So this summer, for reasons that in hindsight are somewhat incomprehensible, we decided to take a family trip to the South, and specifically to do a civil rights tour. And given sort of the heavy nature of the last year that we'd all been through, and particularly given that both of our kids' parents are engaged in public service to some degree, we were tired. But we walked into this really heavy, as my kids kept saying to me, this is a trip. This is not a vacation, Mom. But basically, even though we as a family certainly were fairly well educated, and I think had a reasonable framework, what you would call probably an above average understanding of the civil rights period and what had happened there, absolutely nothing could have prepared us for the experience we had as we immersed ourselves in basically the events that started when enslaved people were brought to our nation, and kind of walking through their experience over several hundred years until it sort of culminated in the events of the civil rights period. And one of the things that was so interesting to me is that at points it felt very almost unbearably burdensome, both for us as adults and for our children, to have to face these things. But my children left that experience, I think, with, in retrospect, an incredible resilience, a respect for people who are willing to, and I think a more visceral understanding than they'd ever had of what it takes to sacrifice, to achieve, and to maintain the values that they sort of take for granted, and a profound, almost redemptive respect for the people, the handful of people, because it really wasn't many, who were willing to endure incredibly significant hardship in order to bring into focus really the sins that we were committing as a nation, and demand, based on exactly the principles that we talked about, retribution, restitution, and change. And the people that did that were the people least likely to believe in the American ideals and our values, and yet they were the people that understood them more profoundly than all of the people they were living with and most of the people that observed them. And because they internalized them and claimed those truths, they could not be stopped. They were able to literally, I think, perform what we have to kind of acknowledge is a little bit of a second American Revolution. There was a whole swath of our nation that was not living under democratic principles, even for the oppressors. And so I guess the reason I tell that story is I think it is incredibly possible for us to walk into the darkness, and that only brings into higher relief the light. And it allows us to see the light clearly and to follow it to really profound destinations. And I have hopes that in this darkness, there will be people who continue to shine the light, and that there will be Americans that gather to that light and work to make change.
Well, Patrick, that's beautiful, Jen. Thank you. One of my favorite quotes comes from the columnist Michael Gerson, and I won't be able to get the quote right, but I'll get the gist of it. Is he said, "American heroes are heroes of unity," and then he goes through and compares and contrasts William Lloyd Garrison with Frederick Douglass, the early Malcolm X with Martin Luther King. And both Douglass and King, their views prevailed, and they were based on American ideals, right? It was American principles that they were pointing out. They were showing the gap between the aspiration and the real, but they weren't willing to give up on the aspiration, right? And that's why Frederick Douglass and Dr. King are such important figures, because they're, I hadn't thought of this before, but thank you, Jen. In this moment, I think that's what they would be doing. They'd be saying, don't give up, just get smarter and double down on it. These are principles that can work. So.
And I think it's easy for us to sort of despair, because we haven't traditionally, people like you, me, the three of us on this call, haven't always been in a position where we had to come to grips with, hardship, maybe to the degree. And so this is sort of asking us to, I don't know, rise to the occasion.
Yeah, thanks for all of that. I mean, while we're telling stories, I'll never forget, and Tom, you talking about your experience in Eastern Europe, former communist countries. So I lived for 2 years in Egypt, and this was before the Arab Spring. And I was I taught at the American University in Cairo there, and I was the acting director of the Center for American Studies during the fall of 2008. And that was the Barack Obama, John McCain election. And so I thought it would be fun. And I really was doing nothing more than just trying to drum up interest in the American Studies Center. But I thought, why don't we do a mock election in the middle of campus? So we set up a big booth in the main plaza in the middle of campus. We had one side that was McCain, kind of his main policy points. One side that was Obama, his main policy points. We gave students candy for voting. I mean, we did bribe them, but anybody could come and vote. I mean, it won't surprise you to know that Obama just trounced McCain. It was something like 95% to 5% or something like that in that context. But the real takeaway for me came afterwards. I went back to our department offices, and I was talking to our department secretary who had helped me set things up, and it was open to staff as well. They could come down and vote as well. And so I'd seen her kind of come through and fill out her ballot and vote. So I went afterwards, and I said, "Hey, how'd you think it went? How was it?" And she started weeping openly. And she said, "Look, I know it was just for fun. I know it was just a campus event. I know it didn't mean anything, but it was the first time in my life that I had a choice." And let's just say I've never missed an election ever since. And so some of those things are absolutely worth fighting for. So.
Can I
well,
just
let's
add to
shift
that?
gears. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add super briefly. I think that one thing that we can take hope from, and it's why MWEG is really fervently engaged right now in supporting the freedom to vote, is the fact that in November, in spite of a global pandemic, voters were able to do what much of our elected leadership was unable to, in the sense that they were able to uphold the Constitution and to defend democratic governance. And I think that tells me, and the fact that the assault has been so forceful on the vote following that, it tells me that that in many ways we actually can trust the American people, and those that would tell us we can't are sowing, real unpleasantness, but that we deserve it to our fellow citizens to defend and protect at great cost, if we have to, their right to participate in self-determination, and their right to be free to vote. And I think if we do that, I actually have a lot more faith in the outcome than maybe others would.
Right. Well, so I'm joined in this episode by Jennifer Walker Thomas, who's the co-executive director of Mormon Women for Ethical Government, or MWEG, and also Thomas Griffith, who's a retired DC Circuit Court judge. and we're talking about Latter-day Saints in politics. So let's transition now to talk about Latter-day Saints in politics, not just American politics, but the specific role that the Latter-day Saints might have. And you've both thought and spoken about this extensively. So Tom, a week after Mitt Romney lost to Barack Obama in the 2012 presidential election, you gave an address that BYU Studies later published. It was called A Mormon Approach to Politics. And in it, you said, politics is, for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, a religious activity. Properly understood, politics should be pursued to satisfy our passion for justice, which comes from God. You went on to say, we must expend our best efforts to provide help and succor to those who have been pushed to the margins of our society, to those who have been left out and left behind. But then you warned, the practice of politics poses grave risk to our spiritual well-being. So what did you mean back then? 2012 seems like a long time ago, but what did you mean that politics is a religious activity, but also a risk to our spiritual well-being? Do you still feel that way today?
Yeah, I do. And it's even more of a risk perhaps today. It's a risk because it involves power, right? And anytime you're dealing with power, you're involved in something very risky. I mean, the Savior made that point clear when he talked about it's easier for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle than it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man. And by rich man, he meant powerful and all the things that we think of that. So no, it's very risky. You can easily lose your soul in politics. But I think in the Restoration we have some key insights that let us know that politics properly pursued is a spiritual enterprise. I'll go so far as to say that it's deeply related to the atonement of Christ. And the example for that I'll give is that the revelation that thrilled the early saints, and Joseph Smith in particular, was the story of Enoch and his people, right? I mean, the early Latter-day Saints copied them. They thought of themselves as building Zion. They appropriated the language of Zion, and that was the goal. If you were a Latter-day Saint in 1830, 1831, that's what your religion was. You were to build Zion. And what was Zion? Zion's a city. Turns out Hamilton's right, Jefferson's wrong, right? It's all about cities. And how are cities organized? They're organized by law, right? And so I think that sets the mark for us that is what we are to do in this life, is to try and build Zion wherever we can. I'm a big fan of the Anglican cleric and biblical scholar N.T. Wright, and a number of years ago he wrote a book, I think it's called Simply Christian. It's sort of his effort to give an updated Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. It's kind of his effort of making an argument for Christianity based on first principles. And he starts, as does Lewis in Mere Christianity, with the natural law, that we have this moral reasoning about us, and that's a sign of the existence of God. What puzzled me about Wright's approach to it is that when he was making the argument that there is something innate in each of us that shows that there's a God who placed it there, the first thing that he talks about is our passion for justice. And that really struck me. Wright's argument is that our passion for justice is evidence for the existence of God. And I have to tell you, when I read that, it brought me up short. I thought, when I thought of my religious imperatives, yeah, justice is a good thing, but I didn't think it was that central. I think Wright's I think he's onto something. I think he's exactly right. I think the city of Enoch shows that that's the case, and a strong case can be made that the Book of Mormon and other restoration scriptures do the same. So yes, I think the pursuit of politics can be working out the effects of the atonement of Christ here and now. Now, some very important qualifications on it, because I think it's pretty clear from the story of the city of Enoch and from other scriptural accounts that our goal is clear in what politics should be. And that is that we are creating a society where those who have been pushed to the margins of society have an opportunity to flourish. That is the goal. Now, we can have debates over how that's to happen, right? And my progressive friends will have a different perspective on how that's to happen than I will have. But that's got to be the one understood given. That's the goal, to create a society, a Matthew 25 society, a society in which the least of these have an opportunity to flourish. It was Mitch Daniels, no progressive, right? Head of the Office of Management Budget during Bush 43, governor of Indiana, now chancellor at Purdue. I'll bungle his quote, but it goes something like this. In all things, speaking of politics and government, in all things, our first thought is always for those on the first rung of life's ladder and how we might help them climb. That's not a progressive idea. That's not a conservative idea. That's an American idea. So if our politics need to be focused on that, and when they are, when we have debates about how to make that happen, then politics is approaching the rather idealized form that I described it in that language. Now we know that not all politics operates that way, but I think as Christians, as Latter-day Saints, our politics must. I think that's what we're called to do, and our story of the city of Enoch ought to be our inspiration for it.
I love that. So Jen, you, I will say that in the past couple of years, one of the few glimmers of hope for me has been MWEG, Mormon Women for Ethical Government. Congratulations on all you've done. I deeply admire the work that your organization is doing. Maybe not everybody who's listening has heard of MWEG. Can you talk a little bit about how and why it came about, the main values that you have as an organization, and what you're trying to accomplish in this very fraught political environment?
That is another big question
Yeah.
that has a lot of aspects to it, and I'll try to be very concise. MWEGs began in January 2017. Charlene Mullins Glenn kind of witnessed things that were playing out in the political sphere and decided to begin a Facebook group in response to concerns about hyperpartisanship and the erosion of important norms. And she also, I think, wanted to heed President Nelson's call to women of the church to speak up and speak out. And she put together an organization that was built around what are still our governing principles today. So a focus on ethical government, that the organization is faithful, nonpartisan, peaceful, proactive, and drafted a set of principles of peacemaking that are adapted from Martin Luther King Jr.'s principles of nonviolence. So MWEG grew quickly and as a Facebook group, and then we realized that there are a lot of women that were interested in participating in this endeavor, but we then had to build out a structure and an organization that could support their efforts and could focus their efforts in really meaningful ways. And we've spent the last few years trying to build an organization that we hope can outlast this period of time. There are lots of things that have grown up in the last couple of years that have already disappeared. And we're pretty determined that MWEG won't fall into that category. And, there are a lot of things we're trying to accomplish. But I think to sort of tie back into what Judge Griffiths had just said, I think one of the things that we're becoming very aware of is the fact that there is a very unique role for the women of our church to play in this very specific time. And their talents that we bring to the table because of our own circumstances, that means that we're pretty adapted to responding. And if I can, I just want to give few thoughts about power to kind of add
Yeah.
to his. I think that power, we know, right, from the Doctrine and Covenants, super clear about the corrupting influence of power. And I think one of the problems that we're seeing right now, and that leads, all of the three people on this call, and probably all the people listening to us, to kind of some element of despair, is this idea that power increasingly in our governing systems is being used not to persuade or to build beautifully the society that was just described to us, that politics in a democracy, power should be a means to accomplishing productive ends, but increasingly we're seeing power just be aggregated in order to kind of coerce, control, and for power's sake. And I think that right now women of our faith are in a great position to counteract this, because I'm just going to be super frank and honest. We haven't really had, in many of our cultural, religious, political settings, direct access to power as it's traditionally exercised. And so we have actually had to learn really strong patterns of behavior that forced us to lead in Christ-like ways, to lead with persuasion. We found over the last few years that what we suspected is true, that nobody is reflexively going to defer to us or listen to us. And so as an organization, we have to make our case. And we have really learned to internalize what the Lord tells us in Doctrine and Covenants 121, that we have to claim power by persuasion, by long suffering, by gentleness and meekness, by love unfeigned, by kindness and pure knowledge. And ultimately, I think that's exactly how we want power to exist in a democracy. We want it dispersed. We want it held in small doses by individuals who are peacemakers, but who are willing to use it towards productive ends. And so I think if I had to grab MWIG in a nutshell, it would be that we are trying to help women understand that this is a moment in which they can make a significant difference. They don't have to desire or ascribe to traditional definitions of power in order to wield power in this current environment. Sort of in politics, I think the politics that we'd like to see, the ability to get things done by forming lasting and sincere relationships that are grounded in reciprocity and service, and then getting people to come along with you to accomplish something, is what we want democratic governance to look like. And I don't think that there are actually many coherent groups on the face of the earth who have that capacity to the degree that the women of our faith do. Remarkably, I think these women are not of one race or economic status or one nationality or even unified around one political ideology. They are simply unified around discipleship. And I think this makes us uniquely prepared to step up and to do the work that Judge Griffiths talked about, which is specifically to build Zion. Because for us, we are framing this experiment not as simply an attempt to gain political power, but an attempt to help our women do the work of building Zion.
That's Jen. That's wonderful. Can I follow up on that? And this is an MWEG point, but it builds upon it. A couple of years ago, Richard Bushman coined the phrase "radiant Mormonism." That's back when we were using the phrase Mormonism. I don't think he's updated it, but I'm going to use his phrase. And he used it to describe the influence that Latter-day Saints were having in their communities by taking the principles that we use to create our families and our ward societies, and take them outside the chapel and put them into use in our communities. I think Richard's onto a really powerful idea there. Years ago, we were all amazed when Steve Covey, made a lot of money by taking lessons he had learned in church and then gave to the business world. We were all thinking, man, I could have done that too.
I could have done that, yeah.
I think we probably don't realize just what a unique experience many of us have just by simply by virtue of being in a ward. The skills that we have to develop with people who are different than we are, and yet we're working with them in the primary, and we have to learn how to get along with them. That those skills, if let loose in society at large, could really, I believe, I don't think I'm being overly optimistic about this. I believe Latter-day Saints can play an outsized role in being the bridge builders, being the agents of reconciliation that our country so desperately needs, simply by taking the lessons we learned on our missions, from home teaching and visiting teaching, and now ministering, from being on board councils, and apply that to the world. And I believe that if we do that, that is the way that we can support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I'm all for supporting, defending the Constitution. I took an oath to do so. But the Constitution is about so much more than the Second Amendment, right? Second Amendment is important, but it's about so much more than the Second Amendment. The heart and soul of the Constitution is compromised for the sake of unity. Those framers in 1787, as they met in Philadelphia, it was about to fail. It succeeded. Washington described its success as the result of the spirit of amity and mutual deference, which the peculiarity of our political circumstances rendered indispensable. You drill down on that and you see what happened is that these delegates, on the brink of failure, decided that they were not going to fail. They were going to make this succeed. They agreed to compromise for the sake of unity before they knew the terms of the compromise. That is the spirit of the Constitution, that we are more interested in creating a community, in creating a United States of America, than we are about any particular point that's critical to us. That is a profound, I think, insight into what the Constitution is about. So what I tell people is when you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, I believe you're taking an oath that you will be an agent of reconciliation. That's what that means. If you are an agent of division, you are not supporting and defending the Constitution. You may be supporting your own particular views, your own particular interests, but you are not supporting the Constitution, because the Constitution requires compromise. It was born in compromise, and it was born in compromise for the sake of unity. I think our people can help. It can help in that project. Unfortunately, we're kind of new to national politics, and it seems like too often we've just followed what the big kids on the block have been doing for years and years. And I know I'm over time, but when I was at BYU, President Kimball came and gave a talk about a style of our own and in dress and grooming, right? And we, and that was kind of cool that we had a style of our own. What I'm waiting for and hoping for and hopefully working for is that Latter-day Saints have a style of our own when it comes to politics, that we become known as you are the people that work real hard at getting people to reconcile and to compromise. That's who you all are. That's sort of my dream. We've got the theology for it. We have the experience for it. We just need to start practicing it.
So this, can I just say, in shameful organizational promotion, that is exactly what we are doing. So I think one of the things that we have found as an organization have met, that in almost, I think without exception, in every conversation, MWEG is the moderating voice. Because we are nonpartisan, because we are faith-based, because we are committed to being faith or peaceful in our engagement, and because we are proactive, we're just not here to talk. We find ourselves in all sorts of fantastic conversations representing, people of our faith. We're not representing the church, but we are representing, what a politics that emerges from our unique religious tradition can look like. And so that means that when we're talking with progressives, they say it's just so great to hear from reasonable conservatives. And when we're talking to conservatives, they're like, we find that you are very palatable progressives. It's super interesting to us because we're like, well, we're neither of those things. We're just us. But I think back to your earlier point, about us being new to political power and engaging on the national sphere. I think we sort of a little bit wanting to play with the big kids sold our souls, or lost our way a little bit. And I think that, to build upon what you've said, if we truly want to be on the errand of the Lord, if we want to be representing him as disciples of Christ, as people engaged in the restoration of all things, then we have to be prepared a little bit to lose ourselves in order to save ourselves. I think that our errand will never prosper. It might prosper because of our intelligence, or newfound financial power, or whatever, but I don't think it will prosper because of support kind of from the Almighty, if we are engaged in politics with the traditional pursuit of power in mind, to exercise it on behalf of our church, to exercise it on behalf of our people. I just don't think that is how we will get anywhere. But I think if we are willing to be living and breathing manifestations, just like you said, of discipleship, of reconciliation, of basically the Beatitudes, the commandment to love our neighbor like ourselves, I think that there is almost nothing that we will not be able to accomplish, and there is almost no room that we will ultimately not be welcomed in, because we will be speaking with a unique voice, and one that increasingly we find in MWEG people hear as resonating with truth. And that's a weighty responsibility, but if you're not trying to use it to aggregate power, that in itself protects you from abusing it.
And here we have a charge from President Nelson, right? That we are to be builders of bridges and not of walls of separation. And then we have President Oaks summing up the very core of the Constitution in April conference, when he said, and this is pretty close to a quote, right? On contested issues, we seek to moderate and to unify. Now, there's a pretty good litmus test. Is that what I am doing? On contested issues, am I, as a Latter-day Saint, am I seeking to moderate and to unify? There's the charge. President Oaks gave it to us. Now the doing of it's going to be tough, but and I need to change. That brought me up short in a number of ways, but I think that's our charge.
So let me ask you each. We have questions starting to come in from the audience, and others who are listening in, feel free to start typing in questions in the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we can. Let me finish with one question to both of you, and I think you've started to answer it, but I want you to answer it directly. So Tom, you've called for civic charity. Jen, you talk about MWEG in terms of nonpartisan, peaceful politics. In 2021, isn't that all a bit naive? Isn't it just a recipe to get rolled over? Right? Or at least to not be taken seriously by people who see politics and experience politics and invest enormous sums of money in politics as a hard knock, winner takes all endeavor. So how does civic charity, how does nonpartisan, peaceful politics speak to the politics of January 6th? Yeah. Or the other challenges that we face. Jen, do you want to go first, and then Tom, and then we'll turn it. Then we'll go to our audience.
Yeah, so I think that the problem comes when we say that our objective as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is to sort of fix our politics or is to fix our civil society. I'm not even actually entirely sure that that is the best way to frame the question, nor is it maybe even something that we should be terribly worried about. And I think that let me make my case for that. I think that the instead the thing that we can fix uniquely as a people is that we have um, unique, enormous, and in fact the only God-given control on the earth about whether or not we build Zion. And Zion is as much a temporal community as it is a spiritual one. Every single thing that you and I would do to bring about Zion or to prepare people to live in it, to create the hearts that make it possible, is going to ripple out positively into our current political and civic spheres. So if I want Zion to be just, I have to work now to build communities of justice. If Zion has no port, then Judge Griffiths has to figure out how are we going to set up structures so that people are not oppressed into poverty. If Zion is going to have no ites, and you, the three of us, want to live comfortably in Zion someday, we have to actively work to rid ourselves of prejudices, kind of be open to the realities that other people face. Which says to me, actually, as a passive or maybe small actor in as a citizen of the United States, I don't have tons of control, but as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a builder of the kingdom of Zion, I actually have a great deal of control. And any effort that I put forward to maintaining traditional and coercive political power is an effort that might get me somewhere in the short term, but is going to be lost on me in the eternities. But every effort that the three of us put towards building Zion will be a gift to us. It will be a gift to our children and our children's children and all of the people around us, because we'll be actively building a society that is a place of joy and refuge. Does that end up translating into our civil society? I hope. I hope that all of those efforts make our civil society better. But if they don't, we actually have created the very thing that we're commanded to create. We've created a temporal space that is unique and reflects pure discipleship. So I think we can do that. I think we have power to do that, and we're empowered to do that. And any efforts that we put towards that will actually also benefit our civil society as well.
So
Powerful.
I'd have two responses to that, Patrick. First of all, it's the right way to be. I mean, we are the salt of the earth. We're not Benedict option people. We're not supposed to run away. We only ran out to Utah once. That was it. We're now in the world. Okay, we're the salt of the earth. We're supposed to be here. We're supposed to be different. We're supposed to be different. So first of all, it's the right thing to do, to treat others with respect and dignity, and to listen empathetically and to hear them. That's the right thing to do. Second, I think it's the only thing that's going to work, right?
I agree.
Because so just a prudential matter is a pragmatic matter. How's the other one working? How's the going for the jugular and trying to destroy your enemy? How does that work? It's not working too well, right? And we do have an example from fairly recent history where it worked. And that was Dr. King, right? And his movement of nonviolence and Christian love. It worked. It changed people's hearts. And so.
And we have great examples in our own scripture, right?
Yeah.
In the Book of Mormon. And we have great examples in our own narrative history as early saints. When we did it right, it worked. When it didn't, we caused as many problems as we solved.
So now, Patrick, I get this a lot, and it comes along with the idea of, oh, you're so naive. I don't think I'm naive. I think I can be accused of a lot of things, but for better or for worse, I've been in the thick of it for a long while, and I believe this can work. The other thing is there's no other. I don't know the alternative. The alternative is to give up your values and forget that you're a disciple of Christ, whose goal is to avoid contention and to build Zion. But anyway, I think
to abandon that enterprise, which I'm not willing to do. I don't think any of us are, right?
Yeah, I think it can work.
Right. Thank you. All right, we have some great questions. You both okay to take a couple questions from the audience? All right.
Jen's willing to take all of them. Go ahead, Jen.
Okay. All right.
Not a chance.
So one question is, Tom, you had mentioned about how politics, quoting Mitch Daniels, but also talking to yourself and quoting the New Testament, that the purpose of politics is to raise those who are on the margins of society, the most vulnerable. So what do you mean by that specifically? What specific actions would or should American society take to help those on the margins of society?
Well, that's where the debate begins, right? And there are very different views about how to do that. Progressives have one set of views, conservatives have another set of views, and so I'm not advocating any particular policy, although I have my personal preferences. What I'm trying to say is that's what we need to be agreed on. That's the goal, and the only debate is how we accomplish that. How do we create a society in which those who are underrepresented, those who have been marginalized, have an opportunity to flourish, right? How do we create a just society that way? So I'm not advocating. I mean, I have my own personal views, but those are, I think, irrelevant. The point I want to make is that's the objective that I think all of us should have to be involved in the type of politics that I'm talking about, that is a politics that pursues humans' passion for justice.
Great, thanks. Jen, we've got a question that I think is mostly for you. How can a man work with MWEG or help their efforts?
Okay, do you really want an answer to that question?
Absolutely. I want it personally.
So here's the thing. One of the things that has been, I wouldn't say surprising to us, but maybe surprising to the extent, is that we have been welcomed with open arms, and actually sometimes financially supported by with the exception of our women who give us, monthly donations to kind of help keep the lights on, by people outside of our faith rather than in. And they seem to recognize the merits of our work before even maybe our own people have. And that sounds sort of maybe greedy, but MWEG is built on 90% volunteer, but we also need money, right, to keep lights on. And we live in a community where lots of women have chosen to stay home. And so we still have, a lot of the finances are controlled by men. And so one thing that really men can do is make small but regular donations to kind of help us do our work. And then I think the other thing that men can do is share what we're doing. Say, I very publicly and in public spaces, be aware of what we're doing, be aware of the philosophy that underpins our work. We've put a lot of time, energy, and thought into what we're doing, and amplify our voice, right? That is a really meaningful thing that people can do for us. And I think it also normalizes in our community women being engaged in politics and on the civic stage, which hasn't, always been the case. And so I think men with good hearts that want to support us in this, that like what we're doing, can normalize that by sharing what we do and supporting it vocally.
Terrific. And tell us where can men or women or anyone find you? What's the best way to find you or donate?
So just go straight to our website. There is, a place where that says join us and donate. You can either donate as individuals, or if you join us as women, one of the things that you're doing is we really try to make the point that joining us as MWEG is an active civic engagement, because we are meeting with senators. We are engaging on the national, local, and state stage. And it's better if we go into a room saying, hey, there are 5,000 women behind us. that's great. If we go in to meet with the senator and say we have 150,000 members behind us, that is greater, right? And so even by joining us, you know, amplify your own voice and get to engage in the work. As far as men, we do have a group called Friends of MWEG, which is specifically for men and allows you to have kind of access. We try to share with you what we're doing and make sure you're up on it. So that's one thing men can do, is they can join Friends of MWEG.
Right. Okay, I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. So obviously one of the big debates right now in our society is around critical race theory, which speaks to sort of what you were both talking about earlier about how we think about our history, how we talk about our history, and use it to go forward. So any thoughts about that, but also about, you know, high school textbooks and the way that we teach both history and civics to students? Maybe let's not just limit it to high school, you know, from elementary school all the way through college. In each of your views, what is the best way to educate democratic citizenry around these issues? And if you want to comment on critical race theory as part of that. But how do we do this? How do we educate for democratic citizenship? Tom, you can go first.
Okay, so I'm going to stay away from critical race theory because that's a contested phrase. I'm not certain what it means, and so let's just avoid that. But civic education is critical, right? I mean, as important as STEM is, I'm all for STEM. It seems to me we've gone overboard, right? And we're seeing the results of that right now, because the level of literacy when it comes to civic education is just awful. It's abysmal. Justice O'Connor, who's not well now, but when she retired from the Supreme Court, her major effort was at civic education. Created a great foundation called iCivics, whose point is to teach American elementary, middle school, and high school students the history of the American experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and to teach the heritage that we have, the precious gift that we have, and what we need to do to keep this democracy going. Remember, it's based on the idea that the story, I'm not certain it's true, but it's a great story, that at the end of the Constitutional Convention, someone was asked, Benjamin Franklin, what have you done? And the response was, well, we've created a republic if you can keep it, right? And so that's the notion. Can we keep this? And the way you keep this is you teach it. You teach what happened. You teach the shortcomings, but you teach the successes as well. And as I said earlier, I think our successes are pretty remarkable. They're incomplete. We've got a lot more to do, but they're pretty remarkable. So.
Right. Jen, what about you? How do we do civic education, including the hard stuff, including the bad stuff?
So I would just counsel anyone who's listening and anyone that I could ever get to hear me, anytime someone presents to you a theory, an idea, a person who is the boogeyman who is going to bring it all down, that person is lying to you. And they are using usually that idea or that concept to create fear and to be able to manipulate you. And so if someone is raging about something like critical race theory and you can't even define what it is, and they can't even define what it is, and they just tell you that it's going to be the downfall of your children's health, well-being, and Western civilization as we know it, then the likelihood is, in fact, that again, that is misinformation and propaganda, and you're sort of being played. So, but it gets to sort of a bigger question. I think it's being used to build fear into the hearts of people and to play off, we're at this very precarious point. We opened this whole conversation talking about how easy it is to feel that things are quite precarious right now. And so I think our visceral reaction is, maybe as parents or as citizens, is to want to retreat, like I said, back into that ascending narrative. And and because we just don't want to face the bad stuff. But the studies that talked about these narratives and their effects on children show that actually the kids who got taught the ascending narrative aren't the most resilient ones, and they're not the ones that have the best commitment to their family or culture. The ones who retain a commitment to their family and culture are the ones that understand that oscillating narrative. So I personally, as a parent, want my children to know where we as a nation have fallen down and where we as a nation have succeeded. And I want them to be prepared to take their rightful place as the inheritors of that and the people that take it to the next level. And my kids can't do that if they don't know their history. They can't do that if they don't have an honest understanding of their people. They can't fix mistakes if they don't see what the mistakes have been. And I don't see it as damaging to our children to have them know about those mistakes, as long as we teach them the truths about the potential of who we are and what we can become. And I think that civics education situates children in that narrative. It situates them in a cultural and national narrative. And without that, they're just free floating. And I don't know how we can exist as a democracy with millions of free floating citizens that don't understand either the source of their own democratic power or the systems in which they need to function to use that, and the threats to that democracy that have regularly shown up and been beaten back. So to me, I kind of agree with Judge Griffiths that I think that increasingly civics education and the ability to kind of interpret texts and things like that has taken a little bit of a hit in our educational system, and we're paying for that now because we maybe don't have the critical thinkers that we need in a moment of sort of pressure and crisis.
And to take one example of that, to follow up on what Jen's saying. So again, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a historian, but the more one learns about what happened during Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and the Civil Rights Movement, to me, that's one of the most inspiring stories of human achievement that I know of. Now, it's a tough story, right? It's not growing from grace to grace, right? But it's an inspiring story. I can remember reading Taylor Branch's, was it Pillar of Fire, volume 2 of that. I had not known much about John Lewis growing up. It was all Dr. King, was all I knew about. And when I read the story of John Lewis and what he overcame, the challenges that he faced, that I don't know of any more inspiring story than that. Now, if there are people who would say that story shouldn't be told because it deals with a dark side of the American story, and it deals with racism and bigotry, well, then you're robbing the American story of its vitality. Because the great part of the American story that I believe in, and I think is true, is that we're trying to narrow the gap between the ideals that were declared in 1776 and where we are now. And I think it's a fair reading of our history to say that has been our quest. It's over 200 years in the making. It's a long slog, but that's our goal. And I just find that to be an inspiring story. It's far more inspiring when we understand better than we often do the obstacles that were placed in the way of achieving that. So,
and I also have to say that, again, having very recently had this experience of traveling with my children, I think you have to come face to face with, there are lots of people who live secure in their bodies in systems that actually destroy their souls. That to set systems and allow them to prosper where women and men can become oppressors actually has a profound negative effect on them, as well as the people that they are oppressing. And I don't want my children to run that risk. I would rather have my children see clearly um, the risks that, the harm that comes to both oppressors and oppressed, and to present for them a pathway of freedom from that, a pathway towards, as Judge Griffith has so beautifully said, towards reconciliation, towards redemption, and position them to be actors in that reconciliation and redemption, rather than position them to be actors in oppression. I don't feel like I'm doing my children any favors to perpetuate a system that allows them to be corrupted.
Well, thank you to both of you. On the wall behind me in my office, I have a picture of Martin Luther King and Father Ted Hesburgh, who was the president of Notre Dame and a Catholic priest. And they're standing arm in arm. They're in Soldier Field in Chicago, I think in 1966, maybe 1965, singing "We Shall Overcome." And I have it on my wall because I think every time I look at it, I want to be inspired by the power of religion to unite people, to lift people towards their best ideals. And here we had a Catholic priest and a Baptist preacher, arm in arm, trying to lift America to its best ideals, however imperfectly, however, we do it one step at a time. And of course, we know that the religious folks have gotten into a lot of bad politics over the years, but there are also opportunities for people to elevate society from the deepest parts of their religious commitments. And I think that's what we've heard tonight. So Jennifer Walker Thomas, Judge Tom Griffith, thank you so much for being here tonight and talking about what it can look like for Latter-day Saints to elevate the notion of politics in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to all of you who tuned in and are listening. Stay with us and listen to future episodes of the Foyer. Grateful to have you with us, and we'll see you next time.